The prince mocked the farmer who brought him milk, but when she saved the king's life, he was forced to marry her. The majestic peaks of Silvershore rose like silent guardians above the kingdom, their snow-capped summits catching the first light of dawn, where the mountains met the turquoise sea. The royal castle stood proudly, its ancient stone walls weathered by centuries of salt and wind. Inside those walls, nobility thrived in luxury. Outside, common folk toiled for survival. Hope Miller was among those who toiled. At 19, her hands were already calloused from years of hard work, yet she carried herself with unusual dignity. In the soft light of morning, she guided her cart along the cobblestone path leading to the castle, fresh milk sloshing in wooden pails with each bump and turn. The guards at the gate nodded to her with familiar disinterest as she passed through. "Morning, Miss Miller," one guard muttered. "Kitchen's expecting you." Hope smiled, adjusting the scarf that covered her right shoulder, hiding the star-shaped birthmark she'd carried since birth. Her adoptive mother had always warned her to keep it hidden. Old superstitions, Martha would say with nervous eyes. Best not to invite trouble. The kitchen bustled with servants preparing the royal breakfast. Cook Bernard, a round man with perpetually flushed cheeks, waved her over impatiently. "You're late, girl. The prince has requested fresh cream with his berries." "The road was muddy from last night's rain," Hope explained, setting down her pails carefully. "But the milk is the freshest you'll find in all Silvershore." "It had better be," Bernard grumbled, though his eyes softened. He'd known Hope since she was a child, when her adoptive mother made these same deliveries. As Hope poured milk into the kitchen containers, the door swung open violently. Several servants flinched at the sudden intrusion, and conversations died instantly. "I was told my breakfast would be ready by now," Prince Alexander announced, his voice sharp with entitlement. Tall and striking with dark hair and cutting blue eyes, he surveyed the kitchen like a hawk studying prey. "Nearly ready, Your Highness," Bernard stammered, bowing deeply, just receiving the fresh milk. The prince's gaze fell on Hope, who had not stopped her work or lowered her eyes as protocol demanded. Instead, she continued carefully pouring milk, determined not to spill a drop of her family's livelihood. "Look at me when I address you, milk girl," Alexander commanded. Hope slowly set down her pail and faced him, her hazel eyes meeting his without the customary downward glance of commoners. "Good morning, Your Highness." A flicker of surprise crossed the prince's face before being replaced by mocking amusement. "What have we here? A peasant who thinks herself above proper respect." "I meant no disrespect," Hope replied evenly. "I was simply finishing my task." The prince circled her slowly, the gold embroidery of his royal attire catching the light. "Do you smell that?" he asked loudly, addressing the now silent kitchen staff. "That distinct, stable odor?" He leaned closer to Hope, wrinkling his nose. "Perhaps our milk girl should deliver her goods and then promptly remove herself before she spoils the royal appetite." Nervous laughter rippled through the kitchen. Hope's cheeks burned, but she kept her composure. "The smell of honest work is nothing to be ashamed of, Your Highness." The prince's eyes narrowed dangerously. "And now she lectures me on virtue." He turned to Bernard. "Is this what I'm to endure each morning? Impertinence with my breakfast?" From the doorway, a smooth voice interrupted. "Nephew, are you terrorizing the kitchen staff again?" Duke William Montgomery entered with the silent grace of a predator, tall and lean with silver-streaked dark hair. The Duke's calculating eyes missed nothing, as the king's most trusted advisor and the prince's guardian since childhood. His influence in court was unmatched. "Just reminding this milkmaid of her place, Uncle," Alexander replied, his demeanor instantly shifting to one of deference. The Duke's gaze lingered on Hope, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Indeed, though perhaps there are more pressing matters requiring your attention this morning. Your father has called for the council to convene." Alexander nodded sharply. "Very well." He cast one last contemptuous glance at Hope. "See that she's finished and gone when I return." As they departed, Hope released the breath she'd been holding. The kitchen staff quickly resumed their duties, conversation returning in nervous whispers. "You shouldn't challenge him, child," Bernard murmured, taking the milk pail from her trembling hands. "The prince doesn't forget those who displease him." "Why does he hate us so much?" Hope asked. "What did we ever do to him?" Bernard sighed heavily. It's not what we did, it's what we are. Common. The Duke has raised him to believe compassion is weakness, especially for royalty. He patted her shoulder awkwardly. Finish up and be on your way. Tomorrow might be better. Hope nodded, though she doubted tomorrow would be different from today, or the day before, or the countless days stretching behind her. Across the castle, King Frederick observed the kingdom from his chamber window, once robust and commanding. Illness had whittled him to a shadow of his former self. At 55, he appeared 20 years older, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the windowsill. "Your Majesty, you should be resting," his personal physician admonished gently. "I've rested enough," the king replied wearily. "Tell me, doctor, how does my son fare with the council these days?" The physician hesitated. "The prince follows the duke's counsel closely." "Too closely," the king murmured. His gaze drifted to the courtyard below, where he glimpsed a young woman guiding a milk cart toward the castle gates. Something about her bearing caught his attention, a dignity uncommon among the peasantry. "Who is that girl?" he asked suddenly. The physician followed his gaze. "I believe that's Hope Miller." "Your Majesty, she delivers milk to the castle. Her adoptive mother did so before her." "Adoptive?" "Yes. Martha and Thomas Miller took her in as an infant. Good, honest people." The king's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Invite her to bring milk directly to my chambers tomorrow. I would speak with her." "Your Majesty." "Is that wise, the Duke?" "The Duke does not rule yet," King Frederick interrupted sharply. "This is still my kingdom, and I will speak with whomever I please." As Hope left the castle gates, she couldn't shake the odd feeling of being watched. Looking up at the towering stone walls, she caught a glimpse of the king at his window. His gaunt face turned in her direction. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, and Hope felt a strange shiver of recognition, though she had never been in the royal presence. Adjusting her scarf to ensure her birthmark remained hidden, Hope turned her cart toward home, unaware that her life was already beginning to intertwine with forces that had been set in motion 20 years earlier, forces that would soon shatter everything she believed about herself and the kingdom she called home. 3 days after her encounter with Prince Alexander, Hope received a message that changed everything. A castle servant arrived at her modest cottage just before dawn, his expression grave. "The king requests your presence immediately," he announced, shifting anxiously from foot to foot. "It's urgent." Hope's adoptive father, Thomas, stepped forward protectively. "What business would the king have with my daughter?" "I don't ask the king's reasons," the servant replied. "I only deliver his messages." Thomas and Martha exchanged worried glances. "Is this about what happened with the prince?" Martha whispered to Hope. Hope shook her head, uncertainty clouding her features. "I don't think so. The prince wouldn't involve his father in such a trivial matter." After hurried preparations, Hope followed the servant to the castle, her heart hammering against her ribs. The morning mist clung to the cobblestone streets, wrapping the kingdom in a ghostly shroud. The usually bustling marketplace was eerily quiet, with only a few vendors setting up their stalls. Something felt wrong. At the castle, rather than being led to the throne room or even the king's public receiving chambers, Hope was rushed through a series of narrow corridors she'd never seen before. Servants whispered in clusters, their faces drawn with worry. "What's happening?" Hope asked the guard escorting her. "The king has fallen ill," he answered tersely. Suddenly, during the night, they arrived at the king's private chambers where royal physicians hovered around the bed, their expressions grim. King Frederick lay pale and motionless, his breathing shallow, his skin taking on a sickly yellowish tint. An elderly woman stepped forward from the shadows. Hope recognized Sarah Wilson, a long-serving lady's maid who had always been kind to her during her milk deliveries. "Thank the stars you've come," Sarah whispered, pulling Hope aside. "I told them you might help." "Me? I don't understand." "The royal physicians are baffled," Sarah explained hurriedly. "Nothing they've tried has worked. The king grows weaker by the hour." She gripped Hope's arm with surprising strength. "Your mother, Martha, she taught you her knowledge of herbs, didn't she?" Hope nodded slowly. "Yes, but look at his eyes," Sarah insisted, leading Hope closer to the bed. The king's eyelids fluttered open momentarily, revealing irises ringed with an unnatural violet hue. "I've seen this before," Sarah whispered, so only Hope could hear. 20 years ago, during what they called the Great Conspiracy, those who drank from the poisoned chalice. They all had eyes like that before they died. They called it the black flower poison. Hope's mind raced. Martha had taught her about rare poisons and their antidotes from the leather-bound journal she'd inherited from her grandmother. The violet ring around the iris. It was mentioned in the journal. I might know something that could help, Hope said cautiously, but I'll need specific herbs. Some grow only in the caves beneath the castle. The caves are restricted, one of the physicians interjected, having overheard. No one enters without the Duke's permission. Then the king will die, Hope stated plainly. A tense silence fell over the room. Finally, the head physician nodded reluctantly. The king's guard will escort you. If what you seek truly exists, we have no choice. Guided by an inexplicable certainty, Hope led the guards through winding passages deep beneath the castle. The stone corridors felt strangely familiar, as if she'd walked them in dreams. When they reached a fork in the path, she unhesitatingly chose the right tunnel. How do you know these caves so well? A guard asked suspiciously. I don't, Hope replied honestly, equally confused by her own instincts. It just feels right. They arrived at a chamber where phosphorescent fungi cast an eerie blue glow over crystalline pools. Hope knelt beside one pool, finding the rare moon root growing at its edge, exactly where she somehow knew it would be. As she gathered the herbs, Hope's scarf slipped, briefly exposing her star-shaped birthmark. She quickly readjusted it, but not before noticing an identical symbol carved into the ancient stone wall beside her, the royal crest of Silvershore. Back in the king's chambers, Hope prepared the antidote according to the instructions in her mental recollection of the journal. As she worked, the door burst open. Prince Alexander entered, followed closely by Duke William. What is the meaning of this? The Duke demanded, his gaze hardening upon seeing Hope. A milkmaid treating the king. This is preposterous. Father's physicians have failed, Alexander said coldly. What harm can she do that hasn't already been done? The Duke's eyes narrowed. And if the king dies while under her care, shall we call that coincidence? If His Majesty dies without trying this remedy, would that not be negligence on our part? Sarah Wilson challenged boldly. Before the Duke could respond, Hope approached the king's bed with the prepared medicine, a murky green liquid that gave off a strong, earthy scent. Stop her, the Duke commanded. This is attempted regicide. 2 guards stepped forward, but Alexander raised his hand, halting them, though his expression remained contemptuous. Something like desperate hope flickered in his eyes. Let her try, he ordered. I will take full responsibility. With Sarah's help, Hope administered the medicine to the king. For several tense moments, nothing happened. Then King Frederick gasped, his back arching as if in pain. The Duke smiled triumphantly, already moving to call the guards. She's killed him, he declared. Arrest. But his words died as the king's breathing suddenly stabilized. The unnatural violet ring around his irises began to fade, and color returned to his cheeks. It's working, the head physician whispered in astonishment. The king's eyes slowly opened, clarity returning to them. His gaze focused first on Hope, lingering with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. His hand reached out weakly, catching the edge of her scarf and pulling it slightly aside, revealing just the edge of her star-shaped mark. Something like recognition flashed in the king's eyes. Leave us, he commanded, his voice weak but firm. All except the girl and my son. The room emptied reluctantly, the Duke being the last to leave, his calculating gaze moving between Hope and the king with barely concealed suspicion. When they were alone, King Frederick studied Hope's face with unsettling intensity. Your name, child. Hope Miller, Your Majesty. Miller, the dairy farmers. He nodded slowly. Who were your parents before them? Hope shifted uncomfortably. I don't know, Your Majesty. Martha and Thomas found me as an infant. The king's gaze moved to her partially exposed birthmark. That mark. May I see it fully? Hesitantly, Hope pulled her scarf aside, revealing the perfectly formed star on her shoulder. The king inhaled sharply. You have her eyes, he whispered. The same determination, the same kindness. Alexander looked between them, bewildered. Father, what? My son? The king interrupted, suddenly urgent. This girl has saved my life when all others failed. I fear another attempt will be made. And soon? He gripped Alexander's wrist with surprising strength. "You will marry her immediately." "What?" Alexander recoiled as if struck. "Marry a milkmaid, father. Have you lost your senses?" "I have found them," the king countered firmly. "This union will place her under royal protection." "It is not a request, Alexander. It is a royal decree." Hope stood frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. "Your Majesty, surely there's another way." "There isn't," the king said with finality. "The wedding will take place tonight, before sunset." His eyes held a secret knowledge that he did not share. "Sometimes destiny arrives in the most unexpected packages, my dear. And sometimes a crown finds its rightful bearer in the most unlikely of places." As Alexander stormed from the room, his face a mask of fury and disbelief, Hope remained rooted to the spot, her world tilting on its axis in the span of a day. She had gone from delivering milk to the castle to becoming its next princess, and she had no idea why. Hope stood rigid as 3 royal handmaidens fluttered around her like anxious butterflies, transforming her from a simple milkmaid into a bride fit for a prince. Her homespun dress had been replaced with layers of ivory silk and delicate lace, hand-embroidered with silver stars that seemed to mock the birthmark hidden beneath the fabric. Her calloused hands, scrubbed pink and raw, now bore the unfamiliar weight of a gold ring, set with the royal seal. "Stop fidgeting," the eldest handmaiden scolded as she wove pearls into Hope's chestnut hair. "A princess must appear serene at all times." "I'm not a princess," Hope murmured, then caught herself. "At least not yet." The youngest handmaiden giggled. "You will be before the sun sets, though I've never heard of a royal wedding planned in just 6 hours." "It's unprecedented," agreed another. "The court is in absolute chaos." Through the chamber window, Hope watched servants racing across the courtyard with flowers, candles, and linens. The hasty preparations felt more appropriate for a funeral than a wedding. Perhaps, she thought grimly, it was a funeral for her old life, her freedom, her dreams of something more than this gilded cage. "Is it true that you saved the king's life?" the young handmaiden asked, eyes wide with curiosity. Before Hope could answer, the door swung open. Countess Beatrice Hamilton swept into the room, her emerald gown rustling dramatically with each step. With honey blonde hair and cold blue eyes that matched her noble lineage, the Countess had been a fixture at court for years, and, as gossip had it, Prince Alexander's most favored companion. "Leave us," Beatrice commanded the handmaidens, who quickly curtsied and disappeared when they were alone. Beatrice circled Hope slowly, assessing her with unconcealed disdain. "So this is the king's miracle worker, a common milkmaid playing at nobility." Hope met her gaze steadily. "I didn't ask for this position, Countess." "No one believes you did. Not entirely." Beatrice fingered a pearl in Hope's hair. "There are whispers, you understand, about potions and enchantments, about how a simple farm girl suddenly caught the king's favor. I merely provided medicine." "Of course you did," Beatrice interrupted, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "And now, by pure coincidence, you're to marry the prince." She leaned closer, her perfume overwhelmingly floral. "Let me be clear, milkmaid. Whatever spell you've cast on the king won't work on the rest of us. You don't belong here, and you never will. Is that why you've come? To tell me what I already know?" Beatrice's smile tightened. "I've come to give you one chance to save yourself from humiliation. Tell the king you cannot accept this honor. Claim unworthiness, illness, anything. Return to your cows and your simple life. And if I don't, then your time at court will be brief and agonizing." Beatrice straightened, smoothing her skirts. "Consider carefully which fate you prefer." After Beatrice departed, Hope sank onto a velvet stool, trembling. The palace clock chimed 5 times, 1 hour until the ceremony. Across the castle, in his private chambers, Prince Alexander hurled a crystal goblet against the wall, where it shattered spectacularly. "A milkmaid!" he raged as Duke William watched impassively. "Has my father lost his mind completely? How am I to rule one day with a peasant as my princess?" "Your father's illness may have affected his judgment," the Duke suggested smoothly, pouring himself a glass of wine, "though I find the timing rather convenient." Alexander paused. What do you mean? Consider the circumstances. A mysterious illness strikes the king. A peasant girl with unexplained knowledge of rare poisons appears to save him. And immediately, this same girl is elevated to royal status through marriage to you. The Duke swirled his wine thoughtfully. One might almost suspect a carefully orchestrated plot. Alexander frowned. You think she planned this? That's absurd. She's a simple country girl. Is she? The Duke raised an eyebrow. Did you notice how confidently she navigated the caves beneath the castle? Caves that have been sealed to all but the royal family for generations. A knock interrupted them. A servant entered with Alexander's wedding attire, a midnight blue velvet doublet with silver embroidery that matched the stars on Hope's gown. I won't do it, Alexander declared once they were alone again. I'll refuse. No, you won't, the Duke contradicted calmly. You'll marry the girl as your father commands. But you just implied that we should watch her closely. And what better vantage point than as her husband? The Duke placed a firm hand on Alexander's shoulder. Keep your friends close, nephew, and your enemies closer. If she is plotting against the crown, marriage to you places her within our grasp, not beyond it. Alexander's expression hardened. So I'm to be the kingdom's sacrifice. You're to be its protector, the Duke corrected. Marry her. Learn her secrets. Discover who supports her. And when the time is right, he left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. The wedding ceremony took place in the royal chapel as the setting sun cast long shadows through stained glass windows. Court nobles filled the pews, their expressions ranging from shock to amusement to outright hostility. In the front row, Thomas and Martha Miller sat awkwardly in their best clothes, appearing as out of place as their daughter at the altar. Hope and Alexander exchanged vows mechanically, neither meeting the other's eyes. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, the traditional kiss was replaced by the coldest, briefest touch of lips, more an acknowledgement of duty than any hint of affection. The wedding feast that followed was equally strained. Hope sat beside Alexander at the high table, barely touching her food as nobles whispered behind their hands. The king, still weak from his illness, made a brief appearance to bless the union before retiring to his chambers. You should eat, Alexander muttered to Hope. It's wasteful to ignore such expensive fare. I'm not hungry, she replied softly. Pity. I thought peasants were always hungry. Hope turned to him fully for the first time that evening. Do you intend to punish me for your father's decision? I didn't ask for this marriage any more than you did. Something flickered in Alexander's eyes. Surprise. Perhaps, at her directness. You didn't refuse it either. Could I have refused a royal decree? Before he could answer, Duke William approached, offering a toast to the newlyweds. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he addressed Hope. Princess Hope, he said, testing the title with evident distaste. Allow me to officially welcome you to the royal family. I'm sure you'll find palace life educational. Thank you, Duke William, Hope replied carefully. I have much to learn. Indeed, perhaps you could start by explaining how a milkmaid came to possess knowledge of rare poisons and antidotes. A hush fell over the nearby tables. My adoptive mother taught me herbcraft, Hope answered. Knowledge passed down through generations of women in her family. Fascinating. The Duke's eyes narrowed slightly. And your comfort with the royal caves, few could navigate those passages without getting hopelessly lost. Hope hesitated. I can't explain that. It was as if I somehow knew the way. How extraordinary, the Duke murmured, almost as if you'd been there before. The celebration continued late into the night. But for Hope, the real ordeal began when she and Alexander were finally escorted to the royal bedchamber. As the door closed behind them, leaving them truly alone for the first time, an uncomfortable silence descended. Alexander immediately poured himself a generous glass of wine. Don't worry, he said coldly. I have no intention of consummating this farce of a marriage. Relief flooded through Hope, quickly followed by an unexpected sting of humiliation. I didn't assume you would. Good. He gestured to a smaller adjoining room. You can sleep in there. The servants have prepared it for you. Hope nodded, turning toward the indicated door. Then she paused. Prince Alexander, don't! He cut her off sharply. Don't pretend we're going to be friends or confidants or anything but what we are. Two strangers trapped in a political arrangement. I was simply going to say goodnight. Alexander studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Good night, milkmaid," he finally said. "Don't forget who you really are. A peasant doesn't become a princess just by wearing silk and gold." Hope lifted her chin. "And a man doesn't become worthy just by being born a prince." Her words hung in the air between them as she turned and walked into her separate chamber, closing the door firmly behind her. Only then did she allow herself to sink to the floor. Arms wrapped around herself as silent tears finally fell. Outside her door, Alexander stood frozen, unexpectedly shaken by her parting words. He drained his wine in one long swallow, trying to ignore the uncomfortable truth in what she'd said. 2 weeks into her unexpected marriage, Hope awoke before dawn. As was her lifelong habit, palace life demanded she forget the rhythms that had structured her days on the farm. But her body remembered. She slipped from her bed and dressed quietly in the simplest gown she could find among the elaborate wardrobe that had mysteriously appeared in her chambers. The palace corridors lay silent and empty in the early morning light. Hope had discovered that these precious hours before the court awoke offered her only real freedom, without handmaidens hovering or nobles whispering. She could explore her new prison at will. She wandered aimlessly, or so she thought, until she found herself facing an unfamiliar tapestry depicting a naval battle. Something about it tugged at her memory, though she was certain she'd never seen it before. Almost instinctively, her fingers found a hidden seam in the wall beside it. She pressed lightly, and a section of paneling swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. "How did I know that was there?" she whispered to herself. Peering into the darkness, curiosity overcame caution. Hope stepped into the passage, feeling her way along the rough stone wall. The passage sloped downward, leading deeper into the castle's foundation. She should have been afraid, lost in the darkness beneath tons of stone. Yet somehow she knew exactly where each turn would lead. The passage eventually opened into a small, circular room. Weak sunlight filtered through a narrow window high overhead, illuminating dusty shelves lined with books and a small desk. Hope ran her fingers over the desk's surface, tracing a star pattern carved into the wood, identical to her birthmark. This was a study, she murmured, though how she knew this she couldn't say. Among the books, she found one bound in faded blue leather. When she opened it, a pressed flower fell out, a forget-me-not, still maintaining its delicate blue hue despite the years. An inscription inside read, "To Elizabeth, to my brightest star, may these pages hold your thoughts until we meet again." A noise from the passage startled her. Hope quickly closed the book and slipped it back onto the shelf, just as Sarah Wilson appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from concern to astonishment. "How did you find this place?" the elderly servant asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Hope admitted. "I just knew it was here." Sarah studied her with unsettling intensity. These were Princess Elizabeth's private chambers. No one has entered them since. She stopped abruptly. "Since what?" "Since the Great Fire 20 years ago." Sarah's gaze drifted to the shelves. "The princess loved her books. She would come here to read, away from the court's watchful eyes." Hope felt a strange connection to this unknown princess. What happened to her? "She died in childbirth, they say, during the fire." Sarah's tone suggested she believed otherwise. "Come, we must go, if the Duke learns you found this place." As they hurried back through the passage, Sarah whispered urgently, "You must tell no one of this room, not even the prince, especially not the prince." "Why? What are you afraid of?" Sarah gripped Hope's arm tightly. "There are eyes and ears everywhere in this palace, child. The walls themselves have secrets best left undisturbed." For now, later that morning, Hope accompanied Prince Alexander on his customary walk through the royal gardens. Though they maintained the appearance of a married couple in public, their private interactions remained coldly formal. They walked side by side, careful not to touch, as nobles watched from a respectful distance. "You were absent from your chambers early this morning," Alexander noted casually. The handmaidens were concerned. "I couldn't sleep," Hope replied. "I went for a walk. Alone, that's unwise. The palace can be confusing for newcomers." "Actually, I found it surprisingly familiar." Alexander studied her, his expression guarded. "How so?" Before Hope could answer, screams erupted from the nearby village square, visible just beyond the palace gates. A small boy, no more than 6, had apparently stolen an apple from a merchant's cart. Now the merchant dragged the child toward the public stocks, the boy's terrified cries drawing a crowd. Without thinking, Hope rushed to the garden gate that opened to the village square. When a guard moved to stop her, she gave him such a commanding look that he stepped aside, bewildered by his own compliance. "Stop!" Hope called out, hurrying toward the merchant. "Please release him." The merchant, red-faced with anger, scowled at her fine dress. "Palace folk should mind their own business. This little thief needs to learn." He froze as Prince Alexander appeared beside Hope, recognition dawning on his face. "Your Highness, I didn't realize." The merchant immediately released the boy, who collapsed sobbing to the ground. Hope knelt beside the child, unconcerned about her silk gown in the dirt. "Are you hungry?" she asked gently. The boy nodded, eyes wide with fear. "How much for the apple?" Alexander asked the merchant. "For you. Nothing, Your Highness. A gift, of course." Alexander reached into his pocket and tossed 2 gold coins, vastly more than the apple's worth. "For your trouble." Then, to Hope's astonishment, he addressed the boy. "What's your name?" "To Thomas, Your Highness," the child stammered. "Well, Thomas, stealing is wrong, but so is starving." Alexander's voice had lost its usual coldness. "Where are your parents?" "My father died in the mines." "Mother's sick." Hope felt her heart ache for the familiar story, one of countless tragedies among the kingdom's poor. "Take this," she said, removing a small silver bracelet from her wrist and pressing it into the boy's hand. "Get food for your mother and yourself." As they walked back to the palace, Hope noticed Alexander watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "That was unexpected," he finally said. "The bracelet. It wasn't even mine, really. Just one of many things given to me since—" "No," he interrupted. "I meant my own reaction. I've never interfered in such matters before." Hope glanced at him sideways. "Maybe you've never seen hunger up close before." Alexander fell silent, and for the first time, Hope sensed not hostility from him, but contemplation. That evening, King Frederick requested their presence in his private chambers. Though he had improved since Hope's intervention, he remained weak, his once robust frame diminished by illness. "How are you finding palace life, my dear?" the king asked Hope kindly. "It's different, Your Majesty," the king chuckled. "Diplomatic answer. And how does my son treat his new bride?" Alexander shifted uncomfortably. "We're adjusting, father." The king's shrewd eyes moved between them. "I received an interesting report today about a certain incident in the village square." Hope tensed, expecting rebuke for her impulsive intervention. "It seems," the king continued, "that the people are already speaking of their new princess's compassion and their prince's unexpected mercy." He smiled faintly. "Not the qualities the court associates with you, Alexander." Alexander's jaw tightened. "One incident hardly changes my character." "Perhaps not, but it suggests possibilities." The king's expression suddenly changed, pain flickering across his features. He pressed a hand to his chest, breathing labored. "Father," Alexander moved quickly to his side. "I'm fine," the king insisted, though clearly he was not. "Just tired, but before you go, I have something for you." He pulled a small iron key from his robe. "This opens a chamber in the oldest section of the castle, the Chamber of the Star, we called it once." Alexander took the key reluctantly. "What will I find there?" "Truth," the king replied cryptically. "When you're ready to see it." His gaze moved to Hope. "Perhaps sooner than you think." As they left the king's chambers, Alexander absently rolled the key between his fingers. "Will you use it?" Hope asked quietly. "I don't know," he admitted. "My father's secrets have rarely brought comfort." He pocketed the key. "You seem to navigate the palace as if born to it," he observed, changing the subject. "The servants talk about it." Hope tensed. "Do they?" "They say you found your way to the East Tower yesterday without guidance, a section built only 30 years ago. They say you knew the quickest route from the kitchens to the royal library, though you'd never been shown. Perhaps I have a good sense of direction." "Perhaps." Alexander's tone made it clear he didn't believe her. "Or perhaps there's more to the milkmaid than meets the eye." Before Hope could respond, a servant rushed toward them, panic evident in his face. "Your Highness, come quickly. It's the king. He's collapsed again, and the physicians say—" He hesitated, glancing at Hope. "Say what?" Alexander demanded. "That this time, they can do nothing for him." Alexander raced toward his father's chambers, Hope following close behind. Neither noticed Duke William emerging from the shadows, watching their retreating figures with calculated interest. "How fascinating," the Duke murmured to himself. "She really doesn't know." A cold smile touched his lips. Not yet, anyway. The king's bedchamber had transformed into a battlefield where medicine fought against mortality. Royal physicians whispered frantically among themselves as they administered tinctures and elixirs to King Frederick, whose breathing had grown alarmingly shallow. Hope watched from the doorway, feeling helpless despite her previous success. "It's not the same poison," she whispered to Alexander, who stood rigid beside her. "The symptoms are different." Alexander's face remained a mask of control, but Hope noticed his hands trembling slightly. "Can you help him?" "I don't know. I'd need to examine him closely." The head physician approached them, his expression grave. "Your Highness, I fear His Majesty's condition is deteriorating rapidly. The remedies that helped before have no effect." Alexander nodded curtly. "Let my wife examine him." The physician hesitated, glancing skeptically at Hope. "With all due respect, Your Highness. She saved him once." Alexander interrupted. "Give her the chance to do so again." Hope approached the king's bedside. Acutely aware of every eye in the room watching her, she gently took the king's wrist, noting his rapid, irregular pulse. His skin had a grayish pallor, and when she carefully lifted his eyelids, she saw no violet ring, only pupils constricted to pinpoints. "This isn't poison," she said finally. "At least, not the same one. This looks like..." She hesitated, uncertain how to explain. "Like what?" Alexander demanded. "Like his body is fighting against itself, as if something is gradually weakening his heart." Hope looked up at the physicians. "Has he been taking any new medicine since his recovery?" One of the younger physicians nodded. "A strengthening tonic, prescribed by..." He stopped abruptly, eyes darting toward the doorway where Duke William had appeared. "By me," the Duke finished smoothly, entering the room. "A traditional remedy that has supported the health of Silvershore's nobility for generations." Hope felt a chill of suspicion. "May I see this tonic?" "I'm afraid that won't be possible," the Duke replied. "The remaining supply was accidentally broken this morning, a most unfortunate mishap." Alexander stepped forward. "Uncle, if there's any chance the tonic could be causing this..." "Nonsense!" The Duke's voice hardened. "Would I harm my own brother? The girl simply seeks to shift blame from her failed remedies." "I made no remedies this time," Hope countered quietly. The king stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Alexander," he whispered hoarsely. Alexander immediately knelt beside his father. "I'm here! The key!" the king rasped. "Use it. Time runs short." His gaze shifted to Hope, recognition and something deeper, regret perhaps, flickering in his fading eyes. "Trust her. She is." His words dissolved into labored breathing. "Father," the king's hand clutched Alexander's desperately. "Promise me." Alexander swallowed hard. "I promise." Seemingly satisfied, the king relaxed, his breathing evening slightly. The head physician stepped forward. "He needs rest now. Everyone must leave." As they exited the chamber, the Duke placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder. "Your father's illness has clearly affected his mind." These cryptic messages, his inexplicable trust in this girl. "He saved my life," Hope interjected. The Duke's gaze turned cold. "By forcing my nephew into a misalliance, some might call that manipulation, not salvation." Alexander sighed heavily. "Enough, both of you. I need time to think." As they parted ways in the corridor, Hope felt the weight of the Duke's stare following her. She hurried back to her chambers, only to find Sarah Wilson waiting anxiously inside. "You shouldn't be here," Hope said, closing the door quickly. "If someone sees..." Many eyes are turned to the king's chambers. Few notice an old servant. Sarah clutched Hope's hands. "Listen carefully. You're in danger." "What do you mean?" "Lena, who served you breakfast yesterday, gone. Marcus, the stable boy who helped you learn to ride, disappeared last night. Anyone who shows you kindness vanishes." Hope felt her blood run cold. "That can't be coincidence." "It isn't." Sarah reached into her pocket and withdrew a small pouch. Take this. Keep it with you always." Inside was a silver medallion bearing the same star pattern as Hope's birthmark. The metal was tarnished with age, but the craftsmanship unmistakable. Royal quality. "What is this?" Hope asked, though something in her recognized it immediately. "It belonged to Princess Elizabeth. I've kept it hidden since." Sarah's voice trembled. "Since the night they killed her." "Killed? I thought she died in childbirth." Sarah's eyes darted nervously to the door. That's what they wanted everyone to believe. The fire, the tragic birth, all fabricated to hide the truth. Hope stared at the medallion, feeling its weight, not just physical, but historical. "Why give this to me?" "Because you need to remember." Sarah gripped Hope's wrist urgently. "Meet me in the North Garden at midnight. There's more you must know." After Sarah left, Hope hid the medallion beneath her mattress, her mind racing. The pieces didn't fit together yet, but she sensed they formed a picture more dangerous than she could imagine. That evening, during dinner in the Great Hall, Hope noticed the empty chairs where once familiar servants had stood. Their absence seemed to go unnoticed by everyone except her. Even Alexander appeared distracted, barely touching his food as courtiers discussed the king's worsening condition in hushed tones. Countess Beatrice slid into the empty seat beside Hope, her smile sharp as a dagger. "Such a pity about the king," she murmured. "And with your miraculous healing abilities, too, the court expected more. Permanence to your solution." "I never claimed to work miracles," Hope replied carefully. "Indeed," Beatrice sipped her wine. "Though one might call your rise from milkmaid to princess miraculous enough." She leaned closer. "Enjoy it while it lasts. Once the king dies, things will change rapidly around here." "Is that a prediction or a threat, Countess?" Beatrice's smile never wavered. "History is filled with royal brides who became inconvenient. Most don't feature prominently in the chronicles thereafter." Before Hope could respond, Alexander stood abruptly. "Enough idle chatter," he announced to the table. "My father's condition requires my attention. You'll excuse us." To Hope's surprise, he included her in his departure, offering his arm with formal correctness. As they left the hall, she felt Beatrice's venomous gaze following them. "You shouldn't antagonize her," Alexander said once they were alone in the corridor. "She antagonized me." "Beatrice is well connected. Her uncle is the Duke." "Yes. Are you warning me or threatening me?" Alexander stopped walking. "I'm trying to help you, though I can't imagine why." Hope studied him, trying to penetrate the prince's carefully maintained facade. "Because of your promise to your father. Perhaps," he hesitated, "or perhaps because in 2 weeks of marriage, you've shown more genuine concern for my kingdom's people than I've managed in 25 years of being their prince." The unexpected honesty left Hope momentarily speechless. Alexander continued walking. "Whatever my father wanted me to find with that key, I suspect it won't wait much longer. Will you use it? Tonight?" He glanced at her. "Will you come with me?" Hope hesitated, thinking of her midnight meeting with Sarah. "I can't. Not tonight." Suspicion immediately clouded his features. "Why?" "I have my own investigation to follow." Alexander studied her for a long moment. "More secrets, milkmaid. Aren't there always in this palace?" His laugh was short and bitter. "True enough." He reached into his pocket and withdrew the iron key his father had given him. "Take it." "What?" "But your father said to trust you. If I'm to start somewhere, it might as well be with this." He pressed the key into her palm. "Whatever you discover, I expect to hear of it tomorrow." Hope clutched the key, feeling its weight. "And what will you do tonight?" "Challenge my uncle." Alexander's expression hardened. "I want to know exactly what was in that tonic he gave my father." As they reached the junction where their paths would diverge, Hope felt a sudden impulse. She reached up and brushed her fingers against Alexander's cheek, their first voluntary touch since their wedding. "Be careful," she whispered. "The Duke is dangerous." Alexander caught her hand, surprise evident in his eyes. "As are you, I think." He released her and stepped back. "Midnight approaches, Princess. Follow your investigation, and I'll follow mine." Hope watched him stride away, conflicted emotions churning within her. Then she turned toward her chambers to retrieve the medallion. Midnight approached, and with it, she suspected, the truth that would change everything. The north garden lay silent beneath a canopy of stars, its carefully manicured hedges casting moon-blue shadows across gravel paths. Hope had slipped out of her chambers wearing a dark cloak over her simplest dress, the silver medallion hidden at her throat, the iron key secured in a pocket sewn into her sleeve. Midnight came and went. No sign of Sarah Wilson. After 30 minutes of waiting, unease settled in Hope's stomach. Sarah had seemed desperate to share her knowledge. She wouldn't simply fail to appear. Something was wrong. A soft rustling from behind a nearby hedge caught Hope's attention. She approached cautiously, peering into the darkness. Sarah. No answer, but the rustling continued. Hope pushed aside a branch and gasped. Lying face down in the dirt was a young servant boy she recognized from the kitchens. Blood matted his hair, but he was alive, breathing shallowly. "Who did this to you?" Hope whispered, helping him sit up. "Guards," he mumbled, his voice slurred. "Took her, old Sarah, to the dungeons. Duke's orders." He pressed something into her hand, a scrap of paper with bloodstains at the edges. "She gave me this. For you." The boy slumped against her, unconscious but stable. Hope gently laid him behind the hedge where he'd be hidden from casual view, then unfolded the paper. Written in shaky handwriting was a single line. "The truth lies beneath the star chamber. Beware the Duke." Hope's hand went to the iron key in her sleeve. Her heart pounded with fear for Sarah, but rushing to the dungeons would only lead to her own capture. She needed to find the star chamber first, to discover what secrets were worth killing to protect. But where was this chamber? The palace was massive, with wings and towers added across centuries. She closed her eyes, trying to recall if she'd heard the name before, or seen it on any of the architectural plans that decorated the library walls. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. Not her own, yet somehow accessible. A young woman with golden hair ascending a staircase in the oldest part of the castle. A book clutched to her chest. The astronomy tower. A voice whispered in Hope's mind. The chamber of the star. Her feet moved with certainty through the sleeping palace. Twice she ducked into shadows to avoid patrolling guards, their routes somehow familiar to her. She climbed a narrow spiral staircase in the western wing, its steps worn with centuries of use, until she reached a door embossed with a silver star. The iron key fit perfectly into the ancient lock. With a deep breath, Hope turned it, feeling the mechanism reluctantly give way. The door opened with a protesting groan. Inside, moonlight streamed through a domed glass ceiling, illuminating a circular room lined with bookshelves. At its center stood a massive stone table carved with astronomical charts, a map of the heavens frozen in marble. Hope's fingers traced the constellations, somehow knowing their names though she'd never studied them. "What am I looking for?" she whispered to the empty room. As if in response, her eyes fell on a particular star, carved more deeply than the others, one that matched her birthmark exactly. She pressed it, and a section of the table slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age, and a small wooden box. Hope lifted the journal with trembling hands. The front page bore a single line in elegant script. The personal journal of Princess Elizabeth of Silvershore. Hope began to read, her heart pounding. April 12th. I fear for my child's future. William's ambitions grow more dangerous by the day. He believes no one suspects his role in the strange illnesses afflicting the royal council members who oppose him. But I have seen him with the apothecary after hours. Today I discovered his ultimate plan, to poison my brother and place Frederick, the young prince from the minor westerly branch, on the throne as his puppet. Frederick is malleable, easily manipulated, and most importantly, beholden to William for arranging his advantageous marriage. May 3rd. I am with child, 3 months now. Though I've hidden my condition well, if it's a girl, she will bear the royal mark, the star of Silvershore that has adorned the left shoulder of every female in our line for generations. William must never know of this child. He would see any legitimate heir as a threat to his plans. June 21st. The poison intended for my brother was in my wine tonight. I recognized the subtle violet shimmer, the mark of the black flower that grows only in the caves beneath the castle. I switched goblets with my handmaiden when no one was looking. Poor girl. I cannot forgive myself for her suffering. Though the physicians say she will recover, William suspects I know too much. My chambers are watched constantly. Hope turned page after page, reading Elizabeth's increasingly desperate entries as she struggled to protect herself and her unborn child from the Duke's machinations. The final entry made her blood run cold. September 15th. The baby comes early. The stress of these past months has taken its toll. Sarah has arranged everything. If all goes as planned, the child will be taken to safety tonight, to be raised far from court intrigues. I've hidden a letter with the child, to be opened on her 18th birthday. My daughter will bear the star mark. May it guide her home when the time is right. If William discovers my plan, I've no doubt he will silence me permanently. Should I survive, I will join my daughter in hiding. If not, may these words serve as testament to the truth. Duke William Montgomery is a traitor and murderer who seeks to destroy the rightful line of Silvershore for his own ambition. The royal seal lies in the box beneath this journal. My daughter will need it someday to reclaim her birthright. Hope's hands shook as she set down the journal and reached for the wooden box. Inside lay a heavy silver signet ring bearing the royal crest, a star surrounded by waves, the ancient symbol of Silvershore. Everything suddenly aligned with terrible clarity. The star birthmark, her inexplicable familiarity with the palace, the king's recognition, the Duke's suspicion. She wasn't Hope Miller, adopted daughter of dairy farmers. She was the lost princess of Silvershore. The realization left her breathless, the room spinning around her. She clutched the edge of the stone table for support. All those years, she'd felt a strange disconnection from her life, as if she belonged somewhere else. Now she understood why. A sound from the doorway froze her blood. Hope whirled to find Prince Alexander standing there, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the scene. The open secret compartment, the journal in her hands, her obvious distress. "So," he said quietly, "you found it. How long have you been there?" Hope whispered. "Long enough." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "I followed you. After my conversation with the Duke, I needed to see where you were going." Hope clutched the journal to her chest. "What did he tell you?" "Nothing directly, but his evasions regarding my father's tonic were troubling. And when I mentioned your name," Alexander's jaw tightened, "he suggested you might be working with foreign agents to destabilize the kingdom. And you believed him." "I didn't know what to believe." Alexander moved closer, his eyes falling on the journal. "Until now," he gestured to the open pages. "So it's true. You're Elizabeth's daughter." Hope nodded, suddenly uncertain. This revelation made her Alexander's cousin, and the rightful heir to Silvershore's throne. "Did you know?" he asked. "Before tonight?" "No," she whispered. "I had no idea. I was raised believing I was an orphaned milkmaid, adopted out of charity." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, his composure slipping. "This changes everything." "Does it?" Hope studied him carefully. "You're still the crown prince. Your father is still king. A king made puppet by my uncle's manipulations." Alexander's laugh was bitter. "And I'm the son of a minor noble, elevated only because my mother caught Frederick's eye, and the Duke saw an opportunity. Alexander, you know what this means. By blood right, the throne belongs to you, not me." Hope shook her head. "I don't want the throne. I never asked for any of this. Yet here we are." His eyes held hers. "A milkmaid who's actually a princess. A prince who's actually a usurper." Something shifted in his expression. Determination replacing shock. "Sarah Wilson, where is she?" "The dungeons. The Duke's men took her." Alexander's face hardened. "Then we haven't much time. My uncle won't leave loose ends. What are you going to do?" "What I should have done weeks ago. Challenge him directly." Alexander held out his hand. "Come. We need to find Sarah before—" A commotion from below interrupted him. Shouting voices, running feet. Alexander crossed quickly to the window. "Guards," he reported grimly. "Dozens of them, searching the grounds. Someone betrayed your meeting with Sarah." Hope clutched the journal and ring box. "We need to hide these." "There's no time." Alexander took her arm. "We need to hide you. If my uncle finds you here with these—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. As the sounds of searching guards grew closer, Hope made a split-second decision. She tore out the final damning page of Elizabeth's journal and tucked it into her bodice along with the royal seal. "What are you doing?" Alexander asked. Insurance, Hope replied, closing the journal and returning it to its compartment, in case we're separated. Alexander nodded, something like respect flickering in his eyes. There's a passage behind the north bookshelf. It leads to the old servants' quarters. How do you know that? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. I was a curious child, forever exploring where I shouldn't. He pressed a particular book, and the shelf swung outward. Quickly, as they slipped into the dark passage, the sounds of guards reaching the astronomy tower door echoed behind them. Hope clutched Alexander's hand, their fingers intertwining instinctively as they raced into the darkness. The truth, and its consequences, pursuing them like shadows. The passage behind the bookshelf twisted downward in a dizzying spiral, so narrow that Hope and Alexander had to move in single file. Cobwebs clung to their hair and clothing as they descended, guided only by Alexander's memory and the faint glow of moonlight filtering through occasional cracks in the ancient stone. How much further? Hope whispered, her voice barely audible over their hurried footsteps. Not far, Alexander replied. This passage was designed for servants to move quickly between floors without being seen. It should connect to... A sudden crash echoed from above, the sound of the astronomy tower door being forced open. They're inside, Hope gasped. They'll find the passage. Then we move faster. Alexander grabbed her hand again, pulling her along as they raced through the darkness. The passage finally leveled out, opening into a dusty, abandoned chamber filled with broken furniture. The old servants' quarters, Alexander confirmed, quickly scanning the room. No one's used this section in decades. We should be safe for now. Hope sank onto a rickety chair, catching her breath. Safe until when? Your uncle controls the guards, the castle. She looked up at him. The kingdom, from what we've discovered. Alexander paced the small room, his expression troubled. Not entirely. Some of the older guards remain loyal to my father, to the true crown, and the people. He paused. They've already begun to look to you with favor, because I was kind to a hungry child. Hope shook her head. That's hardly enough to challenge a duke who spent 20 years consolidating power. It's a beginning. Alexander knelt before her, his eyes searching hers. The journal. Are you certain you never suspected? Never had any hint of your true identity? Hope touched the star-shaped birthmark on her shoulder through her dress. My adoptive parents always said it was a blessing from the stars. I thought it was just a story to make a foundling feel special. She hesitated. But there were dreams, memories perhaps, the sea, a woman's voice singing, flashes of these halls. Before Alexander could respond, footsteps sounded in the passage behind them. They froze, exchanging alarmed glances. Not the guards, Alexander whispered. They'd be louder with torches. Hope rose silently, backing toward a second doorway. Alexander grabbed a broken chair leg as a makeshift weapon. The footsteps grew closer, and then a familiar figure stumbled into the room. The young servant boy Hope had found in the garden, his head still bloodied but his eyes alert. Thank the stars, he gasped upon seeing them. Gasped. I followed as fast as I could. You shouldn't be here, Hope said, rushing to help him to a seat. You're injured. Had to warn you, the boy insisted. The Duke knows you've been to the Star Chamber. The boy swallowed hard. He's ordered Sarah Wilson's execution at dawn, public. Says she's a traitor who plotted against the crown. Alexander's expression hardened. He moves quickly to eliminate witnesses. There's more, the boy continued. Rumors in the servants' quarters. The king. His voice faltered. What about my father? Alexander demanded. He's dying, Your Highness. The physicians say he won't last the night. Hope watched the color drain from Alexander's face. Despite everything he'd learned about his position, that he wasn't the rightful heir, that his elevation had been part of the Duke's scheme, the grief in his eyes was genuine. We need to get to the dungeons, Alexander said after a moment, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Free Sarah before dawn. And then, Hope asked. Then we get to my father, if he still lives. His jaw set with determination. The Duke will expect us to flee the castle. It's what he wants. You gone, me disgraced, leaving him clear to claim regency until he arranges some convenient accident for me too. Hope considered this. So we do the opposite. We confront him openly. Not yet. Alexander turned to the servant boy. What's your name? Ethan, Your Highness. Ethan, do you know which guards in the dungeon might still be loyal to my father rather than my uncle? The boy thought for a moment. Captain Thorne, perhaps. He served under your grandfather before the Duke rose to power. He never looks happy when carrying out the Duke's orders. Alexander nodded. Good. I need you to deliver a message to him. Discreetly, as Alexander quietly instructed the boy. Hope pulled the torn journal page from her bodice, reading Elizabeth's final entry again. Something about the wording nagged at her. Alexander, she interrupted. Your uncle doesn't know I have this page or the seal. He thinks all the evidence is still hidden in the Star Chamber, which gives us an advantage. Alexander agreed. But a small one. Maybe not. Hope's mind raced. The Duke has always been careful, methodical. He wouldn't make his final move unless he thought he had eliminated all threats to his power. What are you suggesting? A trap, Hope said slowly. We let him think he's won. They spent the next hour formulating a plan, speaking in hushed tones as the castle slowly awoke to pre-dawn activities. Ethan was dispatched with carefully worded messages. One to Captain Thorne, one to Hope's adoptive parents outside the castle walls, and a third to someone Alexander suggested might prove a crucial ally. As the first pale light of dawn crept through the dusty windows, Hope and Alexander prepared to separate. If this goes wrong, Hope began. It won't. Alexander cut her off, his hand squeezing hers briefly. We'll meet at the dungeon's north entrance as planned. For a moment, they stood facing each other, the weight of shared discovery and danger creating a new understanding between them. Then Alexander leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead, not the formal cold touch of their wedding ceremony, but something genuine and protective. Be careful, princess, he whispered, the title carrying new meaning. And you, my prince, she responded softly. They parted ways at the servants' corridor junction, Alexander heading toward the royal chambers to check on his father, Hope making her way toward the dungeons through a circuitous route designed to avoid the Duke's men. The dungeons of Silvershore Castle extended far beneath the surface. Carved into the living rock of the coastal cliffs, Hope navigated the damp passages with the same inexplicable familiarity that had guided her through the rest of the castle. The guards were fewer here than expected, most likely deployed to search for her elsewhere. At the north entrance, a single guard stood watch. Hope recognized the insignia on his weathered armor. Captain Thorne, as Ethan had described. She stepped from the shadows. Captain. The grizzled guard didn't appear surprised. Princess, he acknowledged quietly, using the title that recognized her true identity. The prince's message arrived. Sarah Wilson is in the lowest cell. He handed her a ring of iron keys. I never gave you these. I never saw you. Thank you, Hope whispered. Don't thank me yet, Thorne responded grimly. The Duke himself is down there, arrived just minutes ago. Hope's blood ran cold. Why? Questioning the prisoner? He said. Thorne's weathered face betrayed his disgust. Though, in my experience, questions asked in dungeons rarely require answers. Hope hesitated. She should wait for Alexander as planned. But if Sarah was being tortured, how many guards with him? Just 2, his personal men, not castle guards. They don't trust us old-timers anymore. Thorne adjusted his sword. The East Passage will take you behind the cell block. You won't be seen if you're careful. Hope nodded gratefully and slipped past him into the gloom of the dungeon. The Eastern Passage was narrow and slick with moisture, forcing her to move slowly despite her urgency. As she approached the cell block, voices echoed against the stone. One commanding and coldly furious, unmistakably the Duke's. Where is the girl? William demanded. And don't pretend ignorance. I know you arranged to meet her last night. Sarah's response was too weak to hear clearly, but the defiance in her tone was evident. You've protected her for 20 years, the Duke continued. A touching loyalty, but ultimately futile. Hope edged closer, peering through a small grate in the wall. She could see Sarah slumped against the far wall of a cell, blood trickling from her lip. The Duke paced before her, his back to Hope's position. The king is dying, William continued. By noon, I will be named regent. My nephew is already implicated in treasony conspiracy, thanks to his inexplicable support of his peasant bride. The Duke's laugh was cold. I always knew that forced marriage would prove useful. Now he'll be arrested as a conspirator. And the milkmaid? He shrugged. Tragic. How grief drives young brides to desperate acts. Hope's hands clenched into fists as she listened. Every instinct screamed to confront him, but she forced herself to remain hidden. She needed to free Sarah first. Movement at the corridor entrance caught her attention. Alexander appeared, accompanied by Captain Thorne, both moving silently toward the Duke's position. Hope held her breath, waiting for the right moment. Inside the cell, Sarah suddenly straightened, her eyes focusing on something beyond the Duke, perhaps sensing Hope's presence. "You'll never win," she told William, her voice stronger now. The truth always emerges, like a star from behind clouds. The Duke backhanded her viciously. "Poetic nonsense. Your precious princess is dead. Her daughter is about to join her, and the line of Silvershore will end as I planned 20 years ago." In that moment, with his confession echoing against stone walls, Alexander stepped into view. "I believe that's treason, Uncle," he said coldly. "Conspiring against the crown, murder of a royal princess, attempted murder of her daughter, my wife." William spun around, genuine shock crossing his features for the first time. "Alexander, what nonsense." "I heard every word." Alexander cut him off, as did Captain Thorne, whose loyalty to the true crown remains unbroken. Hope used the distraction to slip through a side door, quickly inserting keys into Sarah's cell. The Duke's guards moved to draw their swords, but found Thorne's blade already at their throats as the door swung open. William's gaze locked with Hope's. In his eyes, she saw recognition, and hatred so intense it chilled her to the bone. "The daughter of Elizabeth," he hissed. "I should have killed you in your cradle." Hope helped Sarah to her feet, supporting the injured woman. "You tried," she replied steadily. "You failed." For a moment, the tableau held, William facing his nephew and the newly discovered princess. 20 years of deception and murder laid bare in the dungeon's cold light. Then the Duke lunged suddenly, drawing a hidden dagger from his sleeve and hurling it directly at Hope's heart. Alexander moved with surprising speed, shoving Hope and Sarah aside. The blade meant for Hope sliced across his arm instead, drawing a line of crimson against his white sleeve. In the chaos that followed, William broke free, shoving past Thorne and racing toward the dungeon exit. Alexander started to pursue her, but Hope caught his arm. "Let him go," she said urgently. "We need to get Sarah to safety. And your father?" Alexander nodded grimly, pressing a hand to his bleeding arm. "He's just made himself a fugitive in his own castle, and we have his confession." He looked to Thorne. "Secure these guards and raise the alarm. The Duke has attacked the royal family and fled justice." As Thorne hurried to obey, Hope examined Alexander's wound. "It's not deep," she assured him, tearing a strip from her underskirt to bind it. Sarah watched them with knowing eyes. "Just like your mother," she told Hope softly. "She always cared for others before herself, even in the darkest times. We'll get you out of here," Hope promised. "Somewhere safe." Sarah shook her head weakly. "No need. I fulfilled my promise to your mother. The rest—" She squeezed Hope's hand. "The rest is up to you now, princess." Captain Thorne guided them through the castle's hidden passages, navigating paths forgotten by most. Sarah Wilson, though weakened by her imprisonment, insisted on walking under her own power. "I've served this castle for 50 years, she declared when Hope tried to support her. "I'll not be carried through it now." They emerged in a secluded chamber near the royal apartments, where Thorne had arranged for loyal guards to stand watch. A physician waited, immediately tending to Alexander's arm while Sarah rested on a chaise. "The king?" Alexander asked tensely. "Still with us, your highness," the physician replied, though fading rapidly. Hope watched Alexander's face carefully. Despite everything they'd learned, that he wasn't the rightful heir, that his elevation had been part of William's scheme, his concern for the king was genuine. "You should go to him," she said softly. Alexander nodded. "Will you come with me?" His request surprised her. "Are you certain? He deserves to know the truth before." Alexander couldn't finish the sentence. "Besides, he always saw something in you. Perhaps he suspected all along." As the physician finished bandaging Alexander's arm, Sarah motioned Hope closer. "The medallion," she whispered. "Keep it with you when you see the king. It belonged to his sister. He'll recognize it." Hope touched the silver star medallion at her throat. now displayed openly. What happens when people learn who I really am? Sarah's weathered hand covered hers. Chaos at first. The Duke still has many allies, but truth has power, child. Elizabeth's blood runs in your veins, and with it, her courage. Hope felt the weight of expectations settling on her shoulders. Until yesterday, her greatest concern had been avoiding Countess Beatrice's barbed comments. Now she faced a kingdom in turmoil. I don't know how to be a princess, she admitted. Yet you've acted like one since arriving, Sarah countered. Compassion for the hungry, dignity in the face of mockery, courage against threats. She squeezed Hope's hand. Your mother would be proud. The royal bedchamber was eerily quiet when they entered. King Frederick lay still, his once robust frame now skeletal beneath fine linens. A single attendant kept vigil, nodding respectfully as Alexander approached the bed. Father, Alexander said softly. The king's eyelids fluttered. Alexander, he whispered, his voice barely audible. You came. Of course. Alexander took his father's frail hand. And I've brought hope. Frederick's gaze shifted, focusing on Hope with visible effort. His eyes widened slightly at the medallion around her neck. Elizabeth's star, he murmured. You found it. Hope stepped closer. Yes, Your Majesty. Then you know. A ghost of a smile touched the king's lips. I suspected from the first moment I saw you. Those eyes, Elizabeth's eyes. But I wasn't certain until I saw your birthmark. Why didn't you tell me? Hope asked. The king's breathing grew labored. William was always watching. I feared for your safety. His gaze shifted to Alexander. Forgive me, son. I should have been stronger. Should have stopped him years ago. It's not your fault, Alexander said firmly. He poisoned you, manipulated everyone. But I let him. Regret filled the king's fading eyes. Out of guilt, perhaps, for taking a throne that wasn't rightfully mine. Hope moved to the king's other side, taking his remaining hand. You didn't know. I suspected, Frederick admitted. But I was young, ambitious. The marriage William arranged. The sudden death of Elizabeth and her child. I chose not to question too deeply. He coughed weakly. For that, I can never be forgiven. There's still time to make things right, Alexander insisted. William has fled, but we have evidence of his crimes. We can restore. No time, the king interrupted. Listen carefully. Both of you. William won't flee far. He has supporters, nobles, merchants, even foreign allies who've benefited from his corruption. His grip tightened with surprising strength. You must stand together. Divided, you'll fall to his schemes. Hope and Alexander exchanged glances across the bed. The implications were clear. Neither could claim the throne without challenging the other. What would you have us do? Hope asked. The king's eyes closed briefly, gathering strength. Hope of Silvershore, daughter of Elizabeth, rightful heir by blood. He turned to his son. Alexander, raised as crown prince, trained to rule. His voice faltered. Alexander leaned closer. Father, unite the claims, Frederick whispered. Rule together as equals. It's the only way to heal the kingdom. A silence fell over the room as the magnitude of his suggestion settled upon them. Co-rulers were unprecedented in Silvershore's history. The nobles would resist, Alexander said finally. Some, the king agreed. Others will see wisdom in it, especially once the truth about William emerges. Hope's mind raced with the implications. But we barely know each other. Our marriage was forced, the king finished. Another sin for which I must answer. His gaze moved between them. Yet I've seen how you look at each other when you think no one notices. There's something growing there, isn't there? Something neither of you expected. Hope felt heat rise to her cheeks. She couldn't deny that her feelings toward Alexander had shifted dramatically in recent days. From resentment to reluctant respect to something deeper she wasn't ready to name. Alexander's expression remained carefully neutral, but his hand sought hers across the bed. Their fingers intertwined almost instinctively. Promise me, the king pressed. Stand together. Rule together. It's Silvershore's only hope. We promise, they answered in unison. A look of peace settled over Frederick's worn features. Then I can go to my rest, knowing something good may yet come from all this tragedy. His breathing grew more labored. Elizabeth always said, True strength lies in unity, not division. Those were his last words, as dawn light streamed through the chamber windows. King Frederick of Silvershore drew his final breath, his hands still clasped in those of his son and his niece. For a long moment, neither Hope nor Alexander moved. Then Alexander gently closed his father's eyes and pulled the sheet over his face. "What now?" Hope asked quietly. "Now we prepare for war," Alexander replied, his voice steady despite the grief evident in his eyes. William won't surrender power easily. They left the king's chamber in solemn silence. Outside, Captain Thorne awaited them, his expression somber as Alexander confirmed the king's passing. "The Duke has fled the castle," Thorne reported, "but his supporters are gathering. Countess Beatrice has been seen rallying nobles in the eastern wing, and my uncle's personal guards, arming themselves in the barracks." Alexander nodded grimly. "Secure the royal seal and treasury. Post loyal men at all entrances to the royal apartments." As Thorne hurried to obey, Alexander led Hope to a small antechamber where they could speak privately. "The king is right," he said once they were alone. "Neither of us can secure the throne alone. Your claim is legitimate by blood. But you lack training and political allies. I have the education and connections, but my claim rests on William's deception. So we truly become partners," Hope concluded. "Not just in name, but in power." Alexander studied her face. "Can you trust me that far? After everything?" Hope considered the question seriously. This man had once mocked her publicly, then married her under duress. Yet he'd also defended her against his uncle, risked himself to protect her, and now offered to share the power that had been his birthright, or so he'd believed his entire life. "I believe I can," she said finally, "but trust goes both ways. Alexander, can you truly accept me as your equal, a milkmaid turned princess?" "You were never truly a milkmaid," he pointed out. "And he laughed shortly. "I was never truly a prince, it seems. Perhaps we're more evenly matched than either of us realized." Hope felt a smile tugging at her lips despite the gravity of their situation. "Partners, then." "Partners," he agreed, then hesitated. "But Hope, there's something else we should address," my father mentioned. "Feelings between us." Heat rushed to Hope's cheeks. He was dying, perhaps confused. Was he wrong? Alexander stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. I don't know what I feel anymore," Hope admitted. "Everything has changed so quickly." Alexander nodded, accepting her honest uncertainty. "For what it's worth, I no longer see you as the milkmaid I once mocked. I see a woman of extraordinary courage and compassion, a woman I'm beginning to—" He stopped himself. "A woman who would make a fine queen, regardless of her origins." Before Hope could respond, urgent knocking interrupted them. Captain Thorne entered, his expression grave. "Your Highnesses," he said, addressing them both with equal respect. "Duke William has been spotted in the city, gathering mercenaries and worse. 3 noble houses have declared for him, claiming Prince Alexander conspired with a peasant witch to murder the king." "Witch?" Hope echoed. "They're calling for your arrest and execution," Thorne confirmed grimly. "The Duke moves faster than we anticipated." Alexander's expression hardened. "Then we must move faster still." He turned to Hope, determination replacing grief in his eyes. "Are you ready for this fight, Princess?" Hope straightened, feeling Elizabeth's medallion heavy against her throat and the weight of her birthright settling on her shoulders. "I am," she replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "Where do we begin?" 3 days of frantic preparation followed King Frederick's death. While the Duke marshaled his forces in the city, Hope and Alexander fortified their position within the castle. Captain Thorne summoned retired guards still loyal to the crown, while Alexander sent urgent messages to noble houses that had remained independent from William's influence. The king's body lay in state in the Great Hall, where citizens of all classes came to pay their respects. Hope insisted that commoners be allowed entry alongside nobility, a decision that shocked traditionalists, but won quiet approval from the people. "Your uncle builds his army through fear and bribery," Hope told Alexander, as they watched the mourners file past the king's bier. "We must build ours through hope and truth." On the morning of the coronation, Hope stood before a mirror in the royal chambers. barely recognizing the woman who stared back. Her simple gowns had been replaced by a dress of midnight blue silk embroidered with silver stars, a nod to both the royal emblem and her own birthmark. Elizabeth's medallion rested visibly at her throat, and upon her dark hair sat a delicate circlet of silver. Not the full crown, not yet, but a symbol of her heritage. Sarah Wilson recovered enough to resume her duties, adjusted the dress's silver sash. "Your mother wore these same colors the day she was meant to be proclaimed heir," she said softly. "Before the Duke's schemes changed everything." Hope touched the medallion nervously. "What if they don't accept me?" "Some won't," Sarah acknowledged bluntly. "But the evidence is irrefutable. The journal, the birthmark, the seal, and most convincingly, Prince Alexander's support." A knock at the door interrupted them. Alexander entered, resplendent in formal attire that matched Hope's in color and symbolism. "The great hall is filled to capacity," he reported. "William's supporters occupy the East Gallery, making quite a display of contempt. And his military forces," Hope asked, "still gathered outside the city gates." "They won't attack during the ceremony. Too many witnesses, too many variables." Alexander adjusted his ceremonial sword, but afterward, he left the implication hanging. Hope studied him. This man who had transformed from arrogant prince to determined ally in mere weeks. The strain of recent days showed in the shadows beneath his eyes, yet he carried himself with unwavering resolve. "Are you certain about this?" she asked quietly. "You could claim the throne alone. Many would support you over a long-lost princess with questionable proof." Alexander's expression softened. "Is that what you think I want?" "I think anyone raised to believe the throne was their destiny might hesitate to share it. Perhaps the man I was would have," he admitted. "But that man was a fool who measured worth by birth and privilege." He took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "My father's last wish was for us to rule together. I intend to honor that." Their eyes held for a long moment, unspoken feelings hovering between them. Then the ceremonial horn sounded, announcing the start of the processional. "It's time," Sarah urged them. The great hall of Silvershore Castle had been transformed for the coronation. Black banners of mourning for Frederick hung alongside the silver stars of the royal house. Nobles in their finest attire filled the galleries, while common citizens stood in the side aisles, an unprecedented arrangement that caused much muttering among traditionalists. Duke William was conspicuously absent, but his influence was evident in the cold glares from the East Gallery, where Countess Beatrice sat surrounded by allies. The Western Gallery, by contrast, held nobles who had answered Alexander's call, along with Hope's adoptive parents, who looked both proud and terrified in their borrowed finery. Alexander and Hope entered separately, each accompanied by a ceremonial guard. The high priest awaited them before the throne. 2 thrones now, hastily arranged side by side. Another break with tradition that caused whispers to ripple through the assembly. As they reached the dais, Alexander stepped forward to address the gathering. "People of Silvershore," he began, his voice strong and clear. "Today we gather in unusual circumstances. My father, King Frederick, has passed to his eternal rest. By tradition, I would ascend to the throne as his son and heir." Murmurs of agreement rose from William's supporters. Alexander raised a hand for silence. "But tradition must sometimes yield to truth. A truth long hidden has come to light. A truth my father acknowledged on his deathbed." From the East Gallery, Countess Beatrice rose suddenly. "This is absurd. The king was poisoned, his mind confused. Prince Alexander has fallen under the spell of a peasant witch who seeks to steal the throne. The only poison here," Alexander replied evenly, "was administered by Duke William over many years. I have evidence of his treachery, including his confession, witnessed in the dungeons 3 days ago." Captain Thorne stepped forward, unrolling a document. "I, Captain Thorne of the Royal Guard, do testify that Duke William Montgomery confessed to the murder of Princess Elizabeth 20 years ago, the attempted murder of her daughter, and the poisoning of King Frederick." His voice carried to every corner of the hall. "These crimes constitute high treason against the crown of Silvershore." Shock rippled through the assembly. Beatrice's face contorted with fury. "Lies!" she shouted. "All lies to justify this milkmaid's grab for power. I am Hope of Silvershore." Hope stepped forward, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "Daughter of Princess Elizabeth, rightful heir to the throne by blood. She drew back her sleeve, revealing the star-shaped birthmark on her shoulder. I bear the mark that has adorned every female of the royal line for generations. From her bodice, she withdrew the royal seal and the torn page from Elizabeth's journal. I have my mother's final testament, naming Duke William as her murderer and the usurper of her rightful place. Shock and disbelief swept through the hall. Even some of William's supporters looked uncertain now. A convenient story, Beatrice sneered. But where is the proof that you are Elizabeth's daughter? A birthmark can be faked. Papers can be forged. The proof stands before you, came a frail voice from the side of the hall. Sarah Wilson walked slowly toward the dais, supported by 2 young servants. I was there the night Princess Elizabeth gave birth. I was the one who smuggled her daughter to safety when Duke William's men came to kill them both. She pointed a trembling finger at Beatrice. Your uncle gave the order, girl. I heard it with my own ears. Beatrice paled slightly but rallied. The ramblings of a senile servant. Enough. Alexander's voice cut through the rising chaos. We have not come here to debate. The evidence has been presented to the Royal Council, who have verified its authenticity. He gestured to the row of aged counselors who nodded gravely. In accordance with my father's dying wish and the laws of succession, Hope of Silvershore will be crowned today as the rightful queen. A hush fell over the assembly. And I, Alexander continued, will rule beside her, not as king, but as prince consort and equal partner in governance. The silence that followed was profound. Such an arrangement was unprecedented in Silvershore's history. Hope held her breath, waiting for the explosion of protest. Then, from the back of the hall, a voice called out, "Long live Queen Hope! Long live Prince Alexander!" The call was taken up by others, first commoners, then lesser nobles, and finally, hesitantly, some from the council itself. Not everyone joined in. Nearly a third of the assembly remained stubbornly silent, but the tide of acceptance was unmistakable. Beatrice's face twisted with hatred. "This isn't over," she hissed, loud enough for those on the dais to hear. "My uncle's forces await outside. You'll never leave this castle alive." Without another word, she swept from the gallery, a dozen nobles following in her wake. The high priest, looking shaken but resolute, stepped forward with the ancient crown of Silvershore. "Kneel," he instructed. Hope and Alexander knelt side by side as the priest raised the crown. The great doors of the hall burst open with a thunderous crash. Duke William strode in, sword drawn, flanked by armed mercenaries. Blood stained his previously immaculate clothing, and wild fury distorted his aristocratic features. "This farce ends now," he roared. "Guards, arrest the traitors." For a terrible moment, no one moved. Then Captain Thorne drew his sword, positioning himself between the royal couple and William's men. Other guards followed his example, forming a protective line. "The only traitor here is you, William Montgomery," Thorne declared. "For the murder of Princess Elizabeth, the attempted murder of her daughter, and the poisoning of King Frederick, I place you under arrest in the name of the crown." William's laugh was cold. "You're outnumbered, old man. My forces have already breached the castle's lower gates." "Have they?" Alexander rose smoothly, seemingly unsurprised by the interruption. "Curious, since we've been expecting exactly this move." From the side galleries, dozens of men in farmers' clothing shed their cloaks, revealing the armor of the northern baronies beneath, houses that had pledged support to Alexander's call. William's confidence faltered visibly. "This changes nothing. The people will never accept a milkmaid as their queen." "The people," Hope said, rising to stand beside Alexander, "have already shown more wisdom than you give them credit for." She gestured toward her adoptive parents in the gallery. "They recognize true nobility isn't determined by birth, but by one's actions." She stepped forward, her voice carrying throughout the hall. "I am Hope of Silvershore, daughter of Elizabeth. I was raised as a commoner, and I do not regret it, for it taught me compassion, hard work, and the value of every person in this kingdom." She extended her hand toward Alexander, who took it firmly. "Together, we will heal the divisions you have created. Together, we will build a Silvershore where nobility is defined by deeds, not bloodlines." William's face contorted with hatred. With a howl of rage, he lunged forward, sword aimed directly at Hope's heart. His blade never reached its target. Sarah Wilson, with strength belying her years, threw herself into his path. The Duke's sword plunged into her chest instead. "For Elizabeth," the old servant whispered as she collapsed. Chaos erupted. William's mercenaries clashed with castle guards. Alexander drew his ceremonial sword, which, unlike most such weapons, had been forged for actual combat. Hope knelt beside Sarah, cradling the dying woman who had protected her twice over. "I kept my promise," Sarah whispered, blood staining her lips. "I kept you safe until you could reclaim your birthright." "You did," Hope confirmed, tears streaming down her face. "Rest now, faithful friend." Sarah smiled faintly, her gaze fixed on something beyond Hope. "I see her," she murmured. "Elizabeth is waiting." Her eyes closed for the final time. Hope gently laid Sarah's body on the stone floor, then rose to face the battle raging around her. William had forced his way toward the dais, fighting with the desperation of a man who knew failure meant death. Alexander engaged him, their swords clashing in a deadly dance. "You were always weak," William taunted as they fought. "Too soft-hearted, too bound by honor, just like your father." "I'll take that as a compliment," Alexander replied, parrying a vicious thrust. Hope grabbed the royal scepter from the coronation display. Heavy silver, substantial enough to serve as a weapon, when William momentarily turned his back to her while pressing his attack on Alexander. She swung with all her might. The scepter connected with the Duke's shoulder, throwing him off balance. Alexander seized the opening, disarming William with a complex maneuver. The Duke fell to his knees, his forces overwhelmed throughout the hall, his plans crumbling around him. "It's over, Uncle," Alexander declared, sword at William's throat. William's eyes burned with hatred as they fixed on Hope. "You'll never be accepted, the peasant princess, the cuckoo in the royal nest. They'll whisper behind your back until the day you die." Hope met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps, but I'll still be queen, and you'll still be a traitor," as Captain Thorne's men secured the fallen Duke. The high priest stepped forward once more, the crown of Silvershore still in his trembling hands. "Shall we proceed?" he asked uncertainly, surveying the chaos of the hall. Hope looked at Alexander, both of them bloodied and disheveled from the battle. A laugh bubbled up unexpectedly from her chest, half hysteria, half genuine amusement at the absurdity of the situation. "Yes," she said, taking Alexander's hand. "I think we've waited long enough." 1 year after the tumultuous coronation that shook Silvershore to its foundations, the kingdom gathered once more. This time, there were no drawn swords or shouted accusations, only jubilant crowds filling the streets, colorful banners flying from every window, and the scent of fresh flowers perfuming the air. The anniversary celebration was unlike any royal event in living memory, where once such festivities were confined to the castle and nobility. Now the entire city participated. Market squares hosted feasts open to all citizens. Musicians played in the streets. Children wore paper crowns adorned with silver stars. On the castle's main balcony, Hope stood beside Alexander, watching their subjects celebrate below. Her hand rested lightly on her swollen belly. "Now 6 months along with their first child, they seem happy," she observed. Still sounding somewhat surprised by the notion, Alexander smiled, covering her hand with his own. "Happier than they've been in generations, according to Captain Thorne." The year had not been easy. William's trial exposed decades of corruption that had infected every level of governance. 3 noble houses lost their lands after evidence proved their complicity in Elizabeth's murder. Countess Beatrice fled to neighboring territories, where she continued to spread whispers against the milkmaid queen. Yet for every setback, there had been triumph. The royal council, once filled with William's puppets, now included voices from all walks of life, including Thomas Miller, Hope's adoptive father, who brought the perspective of common farmers to discussions of agriculture and trade. Schools had opened in every district, fulfilling Hope's first royal decree that all children, regardless of birth, deserved education. Alexander had reformed the military, rooting out officers loyal to William and promoting those who showed merit rather than noble connections. Most controversially, they had established a council of healers that united traditional herbal knowledge, once dismissed as peasant superstition, with the formal medical training of royal physicians. The garden where Hope had once met Sarah now grew healing herbs, cultivated by women from villages throughout the kingdom. "Your Majesties," a servant approached with a bow. "The delegations await you in the Great Hall." Hope nodded, smoothing her gown, unlike the elaborate coronation attire. Today she wore a simpler dress of blue silk that accommodated her pregnancy while maintaining royal dignity. At her throat hung Elizabeth's medallion, now a symbol recognized throughout the kingdom. "Ready?" Alexander asked softly. Hope took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." The Great Hall had been transformed from the battleground of a year ago. Now tapestries depicting the true history of Silvershore hung on the walls, including a newly commissioned work showing Elizabeth with an infant daughter, the star birthmark visible on the child's shoulder. Representatives from every province and social class filled the hall, a living testament to the changes the young rulers had implemented. Near the front stood Martha and Thomas Miller, now dressed in fine clothes that reflected their new status as royal advisors. Though Martha still insisted on managing her own dairy cows, Hope and Alexander took their places on twin thrones. Another break with tradition that had initially scandalized conservatives, but now seemed merely one of many sensible reforms. "People of Silvershore," Alexander began, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "1 year ago, this kingdom stood at a crossroads. Decades of corruption and deception had weakened our foundations. Many believed we would fall into civil war. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Instead," Hope continued, "we chose a different path. Not the path of division, but of unity. Not of privilege protecting privilege, but of merit recognized regardless of birth." An elderly farmer near the front called out. "And a finer path it's been, Your Majesty. My grandchildren now learn their letters alongside the Baron's sons." Laughter and applause followed this interruption. Hope smiled, still occasionally surprised by the informality their subjects sometimes displayed. A far cry from the rigid protocol of Frederick's court. "We gather today not merely to celebrate the past year," Alexander continued, "but to formalize the changes we've implemented through necessity and now wish to establish as lasting law." A scribe stepped forward with a large document bearing the royal seal. Alexander took it and read the key provisions. "Henceforth, the throne of Silvershore shall pass to the most capable heir, regardless of gender, as judged by a council of representatives from all provinces and classes. Education shall be the right of every child born within our borders, funded by the royal treasury. No person shall be imprisoned without fair trial, judged by a tribunal that includes their peers. Healing knowledge, whether derived from traditional practices or formal study, shall be shared openly for the benefit of all citizens." With each provision, applause grew stronger. Even some of the conservative nobles, initially resistant to such changes, now nodded in approval. Results were difficult to argue with. Trade had flourished, illnesses had declined, and even the poorest regions reported improved conditions. "Finally," Hope said, placing her hand on her belly, "we wish to share joyful news. The child we expect this autumn will be raised not just as heir to the throne, but as a symbol of Silvershore's new beginning, a ruler who will understand both noble responsibility and common dignity." The celebration that followed lasted well into the night. As darkness fell, the castle and city were illuminated by thousands of lanterns bearing the silver star emblem, turning Silvershore into a reflection of the night sky above. Later, in the privacy of their chambers, Hope and Alexander stood by the window, watching the lights below. "Did you ever imagine this?" Hope asked softly. "When you were mocking the milkmaid in your father's kitchen?" Alexander winced slightly. "I try not to remember that arrogant prince. He seems like someone else entirely." "He was," Hope said, turning to face him, "just as I'm no longer simply the dairy farmer's daughter." She touched the medallion at her throat. "We've both become something new, something neither of us expected." Alexander's hand gently cupped her cheek. "Would you change it, if you could go back to your simple life, without all this responsibility and scrutiny?" Hope considered the question seriously. "There are days I miss the quiet of the farmhouse, the simplicity of knowing exactly what each day would bring." She smiled. "But then I see a child reading who would never have held a book under the old ways, or a farmer standing tall in the council chambers, and I know this is where I belong. Where we belong," Alexander corrected, drawing her into his arms. Their relationship had evolved slowly over the turbulent year. The cold, arranged marriage had gradually transformed through shared danger, purpose, and eventually, genuine affection, the moment they had finally acknowledged their feelings, late one night after a particularly difficult council session, had been without grand declarations, simply the natural conclusion to a journey neither had anticipated. "What shall we name the child?" Alexander asked, his hand joining hers over her rounded belly. "If a girl, Elizabeth," Hope replied without hesitation. "For my mother. And if a boy," Hope considered, "Thomas, perhaps, for the man who raised me with love." Asking nothing in return, Alexander nodded approvingly. "A name from each of your worlds. Perfect." A knock at their door interrupted the moment. Captain Thorne entered, his weathered face apologetic. "Forgive the intrusion, your majesties, but a messenger has arrived from the northern border. Reports of unusual activity." Alexander sighed. "Countess Beatrice again. It appears she's gathered mercenaries from across the sea," Thorne confirmed. "Small numbers, but concerning." Hope and Alexander exchanged determined glances. The peace they had built remained fragile, threatened by those who preferred the old ways of privilege and power. "Summon the council at first light," Hope decided. "We'll face this together, as we've faced everything else." After Thorne departed, Alexander retrieved something from a wooden chest, the simple milk pail Hope had carried on her first visits to the castle, now carefully preserved. "I had this brought from your parents' farm," he explained, "to remind us where this all began." Hope laughed softly, running her fingers along the worn wooden handle. "From milkmaid to queen, who would have believed it?" "I would," came Alexander's immediate response. "Now that I know you, the crown didn't make you royal, Hope. You were always meant for this, not because of your birth, but because of who you are." As they stood together by the window, the kingdom spread out below them. Hope felt a profound sense of rightness. The path had been unexpected, filled with danger and loss, but it had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Outside their window, the stars shone brightly over Silvershore, mirrored by the lanterns below, heaven and earth united by light, just as the kingdom had been united by two people from different worlds who had found strength in their differences and healing in their unlikely bond, and in the royal gardens, beside a marble memorial to Sarah Wilson and all who had sacrificed for truth. New silver starflowers bloomed, planted by the queen herself as a reminder that even the smallest light can eventually overcome the darkest deception.